And it really is an honor to represent essentially all of your interest. I mean, we do spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time as chair of the commission because I've seen firsthand in going around the state how important transportation is to all of us. It's important for our mobility to get around and enjoy our state. It's important to our business. And as a father of 2 teenage daughters, I write about this all the time, the safety element every time they get in the car. And I think that on our Missouri roads, we have 750 people dying every year, several a day. I take a deep breath. And I say, am I doing all I can be doing for my children and my friends' children and everybody else's children on the safety front? And RB will talk a little bit about this. But I spend a lot of time because I'm passionate about it and because it's one of those things in life. There are lots of things that are outside of our control, right? As farmers, you know better than anything, the weather, right? Outside of our control. So many things are outside of our control. But transportation is something that's uniquely within our control. It's something that we can solve and we can enjoy and we can benefit in. And Missouri has a wonderful transportation heritage. We have been a leader in the country in transportation since the first day that Lewis and Clark in 1804 ventured forward with a directive from President Jefferson to go out and explore for the purpose of generating commerce and creating a strong and vital country. Right up to the time when President Eisenhower, returning from World War II and being elected as president, saw transportation as a national defense issue and inaugurated the birth of the interstate transportation system. And we at Missouri have been at the heart of that. We had the first project in the interstate system. We are bordered by 8 states around us. We are the hub of the greatest economic engine in the country, and we're right here in Missouri. But I hate to say that oftentimes we don't recognize how significant we are to the country and how significant transportation is to our place in the world. And right now, we are in a transportation crisis. I had a reporter ask me earlier, well, how did we get here and how are we really in a transportation crisis? And part of it's good news, bad news. I mean, I think the good news, in terms of the farming community is we, unlike so many of the other states in the country and all of our bordering states, we made the fundamental decision back in the early 1950s that it was so important to provide a transportation system to all Missourians, and in particular to our rural areas, that we were going to take into our state system what in other states are county roads. And we took them into the state system believing that if we could centralize the expertise and the capacity of the engineers and the people that we have at MoDOT, and if we could marshal the resources of not just a county, but as an entire state, that we could really raise the level of transportation for everyone in our state. So we now have, as a result of that decision, 34,000 miles of road and over 10,000 bridges. We have more miles of road than the other farm states around us, Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa, all combined. We have more, if you pick any of our neighboring states, put any of 2 of them together and we have more. The entire state of Illinois, but more than the entire state of Illinois and the entire state of Oklahoma. Pick any of them, mix and match. And that's partly because we invested in our rural areas and we invested in a farm economy. And you know what? Our parents and our grandparents, they paid for that investment. And we built out this great system. We got us up and out of the mud. We created farm-to-market roads. And now, what we inherited from our parents and grandparents, we are in the process of squandering. Right now, when I say we're in a crisis, you probably read, we can't maintain those 34,000 miles of roads and those 10,000 bridges. Now, we've taken that as a mandate from our legislature and from our Missouri taxpayers. That's all you want to spend on transportation. But I felt duty bound to tell you the consequences of our decisions to not invest fully in transportation. And we're doing what we can do. The first thing we did is internally. We downsized this organization. We did what no other governmental organization has done in Missouri and many other states. We went from, when I started the commission, 6,300 employees down to 5,100 today. 20%, 1,300 person reduction. We closed maintenance facilities, over 124 of those throughout the state. We eliminated regional offices. And we downsized and made ourselves lean. And as a result of that, we were able to take $600 million and put it directly back on the roads. Because our overhead is fixed, the money we were able to save actually went to contractor awards that built roads or preserved roads. But that doesn't, we can't cut our way to preserving the system. So again, with limited funding, we said, what are we going to do? We're going to have to prioritize. So what we did is we said, well, the first thing we have to do is we have to make certain that we maintain the connectedness between our cities and towns. So we delineated out of those 34,000 miles of roads, 8,000 of them that we delineated as our primary system. That is, they connected communities. The other 26,000 we deemed to be more local roads. And those we made very careful and very certain that those supplementary roads, those 26,000 mile roads, those weren't merely in the rural areas. We have hundreds of miles of those roads that sit in St. Louis, in Springfield, in Kansas City, and other communities because they're local roads. And what we said is we're going to have to do transportation triage. We're going to have to take the limited resources, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make certain that our communities are connected. So we're going to take care of those 8,000 miles of roads. We're not going to enhance them. We're not going to expand them. We're not going to do a lot of the things that you'd like us to do with them, but we're at least going to keep those in the current condition. And the other 26,000 miles of roads, well, they get what's left over. They get the leftover money, if there is any, and we're going to do the best we can. You know, we're going to try and keep the bridges open as best we can. We're going to try to keep the roads going. But right now, we're in that preservation mode. And what you're going to hear is that we are losing ground every day. You probably heard that we had a nice uptick in our economy that actually brought us more money than we anticipated this last year, that allowed us to meet our federal match. The danger is people think problem solved. I said, no, we went from a complete disaster to just a mitigated disaster. Even with that slight bump in revenue, we are going to have the lowest number of contract awards that we've had in this state in almost 20 years. You'd have to go back to 1997. We're going to continue to lose ground on preserving our roads, and our bridges we continue to lose ground as well. Right now, as you heard Tom say, we have 641 critical bridges out of the 10,000 here in the state of Missouri. But that doesn't even count the other bridges, almost 1,400 bridges that are either weight limited, meaning you may not be able to take your goods across them, or school buses or emergency vehicles may not be able to go across them, or even our MoDOT vehicles that want to plow your roads or fix them may not be able to go across them. So we have almost 1,400 of those. And we are adding to that critical list of bridges 100 per year. That means just to stay where we are, we ought to be taking 100 a year off. And we're not. We're not even close to that. We're maybe getting a third of those. So it's projected right now that unless things change, that those 641 critical bridges, in 10 years' time, we're going to have 1,500 of them. And that's why I say that we are in a crisis. Okay? MoDOT can't cut anymore. We can't cut our way to this. We can't manage it any better. The only way we do it is we have to do what our parents and our grandparents did, and that is invest in ourselves. In the state of Missouri, there has not been any real funding increase. We've been left to try to borrow, okay? We borrowed all we're going to be able to borrow. We've had not a real funding increase since 1992, when the legislature increased the fuel tax. And as a result, I was telling somebody, imagine what your family would be like right now if you were trying to support your spouse, your children, educate them, feed them, do all the things that's necessary to care for them, and you were having to do it on what you were making in 1992. You couldn't do it. Your children would be going around uneducated, underfed, and without clothing. Okay? And that's kind of what's been happening with transportation. You know, we've been living off what our forefathers and mothers invested in. And now we have to figure out what we're going to leave for the next generation. And I said the nice thing about transportation is it's something that is absolutely within our control. It's within the will of all of us. And it means that we have to invest in ourselves. One of the low pieces of hanging fruit that almost got across the line in the legislature last session was an increase in our fuel tax. People say we don't need any more taxes. Well, you know what? I agree. We don't need any more taxes. But what we do need to do is we need to invest in ourselves. And what I tell people with a fuel tax is that's really the wrong term for a fuel tax. We think of tax as something that's redistributive. That is, that it's somehow taking from the haves and giving to the have-nots, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. taking it to those who work hard and those that aren't working, et cetera, right? We think about taxes that way. But when we talk about a fuel tax, that is truly a user fee, right? The people, it's being funded by the people that are using the roads. If you're buying gas and you're buying diesel, okay, you're paying for the roads you use. So it's not redistributed. That's why when we think of something that relates to fuel, we ought to be thinking about user fee. It does not redistribute wealth. What it does is people pay for what they use. The same would be true if we would talk about tolling as a way of funding. People pay for what they use. So this, if we just act in our own self-interest, we don't have to be benevolent, we just act in our own self-interest, we ought to say, this is a no-brainer. We have almost the lowest fuel tax in the entire country. We are the 7th largest transportation system because of the decisions we made to include all of our rural areas, and we are funded at the 47th level. I was looking back on some materials I got when I first got on the commission, and there they were saying we are at the 40th lowest funded. Now we're 47th. Missouri is rapidly on the race to the bottom. And you know what? Our rural neighbors, they aren't doing that. They see the value of transportation. So by way of example, last year, Iowa, to the north of us, with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, they enacted, within a matter of a few weeks, a 10-cent increase in the fuel tax because they understood the importance of investment. Kansas has recently increased with their legislature and raised monies. We've seen Arkansas do the same. All of our neighbors around us, and remember, they only have about 11 to 12,000 miles of road. We have 34,000. State of Kansas, for instance, is spending about $71,000 per mile of road. Missouri's at 14. And as a lifelong Missourian, it makes me sad to see us continue on that race to the bottom. We have to do better than that, and we can. Fuel tax is just one part of it, and dealing with the preservation of our system is only one part of the issue that we look at. What's not addressed in the preservation of our system is the second major area of concern, and that is, what do we do with our aging interstate? Starting first with I-70, our oldest and first interstate. And you might say, hey, look, I'm from southwest Missouri or southeast, northeast. I never travel I-70. I-70 doesn't affect me, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what? I-70 affects every one of us in this room, even if you never travel on it. I-70 is the economic engine for this state. Connects our 2 largest cities, St. Louis and Kansas City. 60% of our entire state population resides in 30-mile band on either side of I-70. 60% of our jobs. That means the taxes and the revenues and the consumers, et cetera, all those things that drive our state economy are all relying upon a healthy I-70. Guess what? We started building that in 1957. It had a useful life of 50 years. I-70 is used up. It'll carry around, he'll show you a core boring that shows, we may have a nice smooth veneer on the top of I-70, but below that it is rotten and decayed and can no longer support that. And we must tear out I-70 down to the bare ground and rebuild it. We have the ability to do it, but do we have the will to do it? And that's part of what launched, as Tom said, the initiative that we talked about, the Road to Tomorrow. And I did that because I said we as Missourians, we need to dream bigger. We get locked down in our parochial interest and we say, well, I'm not going to build I-70 using a sales tax or a gas tax, and I don't like tolling because our roads ought to be free. And we get into all this provincialism that keeps us from really being good problem solvers. My view is everything has to be on the table. We have to keep all our tools available. We as Missourians have got to be problem solvers. We got to be moving forward. So the Road to Tomorrow was intended to bring out the imagination and ingenuity of Missourians. And so we said, look, we have 200 miles of the oldest interstate in the country. It's already environmentally cleared. We have been favored by the Federal Highway Administration with one of only 3 exemptions that would actually allow us to use tolling as a potential vehicle to rebuild it. I said, what we're going to do with that 200 miles of road, since we have no money, apparently no willpower to do anything about it, what we're going to do is we're going to take those 200 miles of road and we're going to offer it up to the whole country. We're going to say, we have 200 miles here in the heart of our nation that has to be rebuilt. You come and bring us your ideas of what the 21st century highway ought to look like. And people say, well, how's that generating money? I tell them, you know what, I don't know whether that's going to generate money. But first of all, we know when we rebuild I-70, it's not going to be a road of the 1950s. It will be a road of the 21st century. And that's going to include innovations that we can't perhaps see right now that are going to make that road, that drive across to Columbia and our state university a lot safer for my children. And we're also going to find that things that we could never have imagined as possible revenue sources are going to emerge. And so I tell people, I'll usually hold up my cell phone, and I'll say to people, 20 years ago, this cell phone was merely a telephone. And people saw it as only something that would allow me to place a telephone call to someone. But today, that cell phone, 20 years later, is an incredible economic engine. I can make bank transactions, I can order ball tickets, I can order my dinner, I can order my transportation. I can do everything on that cell phone now. 20 years ago, no one could have imagined. Remember, our iPhones are only 8 years old. 2007 is when that came out. Think how much the world has changed. Look at the people on iPads and iPhones. Transportation stands on the similar cusp of a similar revolution. 20 years from now, people will look back and say, can you imagine those people back in 2015? They thought this was only a road. But now, look at all the things that we do. Now, we have solar panels that generate electricity and heats our road. We have small, windmills that generate power. We've got autonomous vehicles that are driving down the roads. Who knows what? But we opened that up and we said to the nation and to the world, come to Missouri. Let us be a leader. We started the birth of the interstate highway system right here. Let's make this the rebirth of our interstate system here in Missouri. Now, great job, and I think we've in 3 months' time, we issued the report card last month. We're having phenomenal results. We had 180 new ideas come in. 50 of those we've investigated and say, hey, these are really worthwhile. Another 15, we've said, these are something we can probably implement. We're going to see some creativity coming out. But the one thing that we face in Missouri is that nationally, we are not seen as innovators anymore. I remember when we announced this in Kansas City in June, I was calling a national conference on transportation innovation in Pittsburgh, and I said, would you put Missouri up there and let them know we're announcing the roads tomorrow? I said, I'm happy to, but you have to realize that Missouri right now is seen as an unfriendly place for innovation and technology. We're putting up a map at this conference, he told me, and we're identifying states that are friendly to innovation and technology, and Missouri is the black hole in the middle of the country, because Missouri is perceived by the rest of the nation of trying to keep out technology, keep out Uber, keep out Tesla, no public-private partnerships. What they see is a lot of no, and economic barriers. And so that perception becomes real. So if we're going to invite people to come to Missouri, we need to change that perception. That means we as Missourians have to be prepared to make laws that are more inviting and to welcome that technology. Because believe it or not, technology is coming whether we like it or not. We just have to decide whether we're going to be the leaders in it or we're going to be the tail end of it. But I'm enthused. I think we've got good opportunities for I-70, but it's going to create us all thinking outside our box, coming up with new revenue sources, being prepared to embrace different types of funding that maybe we haven't in the past. And then finally, and I'm going to turn over to our group, I haven't even talked about my third bucket of things. And that is, we not only have to preserve our system, we've got to save I-70. I haven't even talked about the things that so many of you would like, and those are the things that would be enhancements to our system. And I think in our rural areas, and RB will talk about this, we know the number of deaths that occur on our rural highways, so many of them from rollovers where you're going off a road that doesn't have an adequate shoulder. You know what? We'd like to be able to fix that. But those are enhancements to our system that we can only do with funding. We know we can make safer roads. We just have to have the money to do it. And we haven't even talked about how we're going to get there. But there is a way to get there. And one of the things that we're going to do that I'm excited about, that the Farm Bureau and Estel, I think with his leadership, can help us with, is that in January I put out a call to people that are involved in transportation. I said, we need to get out of our individual silos. All of us that are affected by transportation, we need to come together in one big group. It can't be just contractors and engineers running around and raising money and trying to get something passed. It can't be individual groups saying, I want this, I want this. It takes all of us that are impacted by transportation. And that's Farm Bureau, and that's our chambers of commerce. That's our counties and our cities. That's individual businesses. We all have to come together in what I call a federation or a coalition where we can sit around the table and say, as Missourians, we should have a common interest in our prosperity. We need to check our parochialism at the door. We need to come up with a common transportation plan. We need to interface with MoDOT and our commission, and we need to engage our political leaders, and we've got to move Missouri forward. And so we're making progress on that. And I've already told Esther we'll be issuing an invitation to Farm Bureau to be a part of that. I can't tell you how important I view Farm Bureau to the future of what we do in transportation. So there are good things on the way. I think the Farm Bureau can and will be at the center of that. I'm delighted to be with you today. I know I took already too much time, but you can tell when I get up and talk about transportation in Missouri, I get enthusiastic. And I hope you'll leave here enthusiastic about the possibilities, because I'm going to end where I started out. We are in a crisis, but the good news is it's all within our control. We can do it. Our fathers and forefathers and mothers did it. We need to step up and do it for ourselves and the next generation.